Alexandria, Egypt. The 3rd century before the Common Era, along a harbor crowned by a lighthouse tall enough to be counted among the wonders of the world, there rises an institution unlike anything humanity has built before. Not a temple, not a palace, a house of knowledge. They call it the Mausoleon, the Shrine of the Muses, and within its colonnades and lecture halls and shaded walks lies the great Library of Alexandria. Its ambition is staggering in its simplicity. To gather, under one roof, every book ever written, every poem, every proof, every map and medical text and star chart produced by the human mind. The kings of Egypt, the Ptolemies, pursue that dream with something close to obsession. Every ship that drops anchor in Alexandria's harbor is searched, not for contraband, but for books. Any scroll found aboard is carried to the library, copied by an army of scribes, and the copy is handed back to the owner, while the original stays behind. The Ptolemies borrow the master texts of Athens, great playwrights against an enormous deposit, make their copies, and cheerfully forfeit the deposit to keep the originals. A scholar named Callimachus draws up the first true library catalog, 120 scrolls long. By some accounts, the shelves hold 40,000 books, by others, 500,000. And the minds the library draws are the equal of its collection. Here Euclid composes the elements, the geometry that will be taught for the next 2,000 years. Here Eratosthenes, armed with nothing but shadows, a well, and a flair for arithmetic, measures the circumference of the earth and gets it very nearly right. Here Aristarchus of Samos dares to suggest that the earth is not the center of all things, that it instead races around the sun. Here Hipparchus charts the stars, Herophilus opens the human body to understand it, and Hero builds little machines that hiss and turn under their own power. For 3 centuries, Alexandria is the mind of the world. And then, slowly, the mind begins to forget. Its end is not a single night of fire, whatever the legends say. It is a long dying. In 48 before the Common Era, Julius Caesar, trapped in Alexandria's harbor in the middle of a civil war, orders the ships at the docks set ablaze and the flames, by several ancient accounts, spread to the warehouses near the water and consume thousands of scrolls. It is a wound, but not a death. The deeper rot is quieter. Kings who once funded scholars turn on them. One Ptolemy expels the library's foreign intellectuals in a fit of political spite, scattering them across the Mediterranean. Royal budgets shrink. Rome wars wash over the city. The Emperor Aurelian's troops devastate the royal quarter where the library stands. Diocletian besieges it a generation later. In the year 391, the daughter library housed in the temple, called the Serapeum, is torn down amid the empire's war on the old pagan faiths. Scroll by scroll, fire by fire, decree by decree, the greatest collection of knowledge in the ancient world bleeds away, until one day there is simply nothing left to burn. What did we lose? We can only measure the whole by its edges. We have the titles of plays by Sophocles and Aeschylus whose pages are gone forever. We know Aristarchus placed the sun at the center, and then humanity waited 1,700 years for Copernicus to say it again. Eratosthenes measured the planet, and the measure was forgotten so completely that Columbus, 15 centuries later, would sail west believing the earth far smaller than it truly is. How much did the long death of the library cost us? Centuries, perhaps far more, but our world is only one of many. Time runs in branches, and every branch is born from a single moment that might have gone another way, a fire that spreads or a fire that doesn't. Somewhere in that endless forest of what-ifs is a reality where the flame was held back, where the Library of Alexandria was never destroyed. Let us cross over and follow that world all the way to its end. The moment of divergence comes on that same day in 48, before the Common Era, on the Alexandrian waterfront. Caesar's fire leaps from the burning ships toward the shore, but in this reality, the wind off the Mediterranean turns at the critical hour. And the citizens of Alexandria, who prize their library above their temples, form chains from the harbor to the storerooms, passing buckets and beating back the flames before they can climb into the heart of the Mausoleon. The scrolls survive. But more important than the scrolls is the lesson. The near catastrophe terrifies the scholars of Alexandria into a realization that will change everything. A library that exists in only one place can die in a single night. And so they resolve, with the desperate energy of people who have just watched their life's work nearly turn to ash, that knowledge must never again be left to rest in one fragile pile. They make copying the first law of the library. Whole departments of scribes are set to duplicating the collection, not once, but many times over. They seed sister libraries in Athens, in Antioch, in Pergamon, in Rome itself, each a mirror of the original, each bound by treaty to copy and share rather than hoard. The Library of Alexandria stops being a building. It becomes a network. And a network does not burn. When Rome swallows Egypt a generation later, the emperors find a library too useful to dismantle and too widespread to destroy. Augustus endows it. His successors compete to fund it the way they competed to build aqueducts and arenas, because a wing of the great library bearing your name is a monument that thinks. And the scholars, for the first time in their history, are handed something they never truly possessed in our world: continuity. Generation after generation, they build without ever having to start over. And once knowledge stops being lost, it begins to compound. In our timeline, Hero of Alexandria built a small brass sphere that spun when steam escaped from it, the Aeolipile, and it was remembered as a toy, a clever amusement for dinner guests. In this timeline, Hero's successors, working in an unbroken line beside the engineers who maintain the city's pumps and water clocks, ask a different question. Not what the spinning sphere is, but what it could pull. Within 2 generations, the toy has become a tool, steam driving the bellows of forges, lifting water from the Nile, turning the great stone mills that grind the grain of Egypt. The Mediterranean has its first engines 1,000 years before our world will build them. The numbers keep pace with the machines. The library astronomers, holding the complete works of Hipparchus instead of scattered fragments, refine his star catalogs across the centuries until the heavens are mapped with merciless precision. And with that precision, Aristarchus is vindicated. Patient observers, tracking the wandering planets night after night, confirm that the Earth does indeed circle the sun. There is no 1700-year silence. Heliocentrism is simply accepted around the time our calendars would call the 2nd century, and the scholars move on to the harder question of why the planets hold their courses, the question that in our world waited for Newton. The network reaches outward as well as forward. Alexandrian scholars, traveling the trade roads to India, carry home a gift more precious than any spice, a way of writing numbers in which a small circle stands for nothing at all. The zero, married to Greek geometry and the algebra taking shape in the library's halls, hands the mathematicians of Alexandria a language powerful enough to describe motion itself. And the geared bronze calculators of their ancestors, the kind of device we know from a single corroded wreck pulled from the sea near Antikythera, grow into machines of brass and iron that reckon the tides, the eclipses, and the positions of the stars years before they happen. In the medical halls, the anatomists who once could only describe the body learn to defend it. Studying why clean water spares a city the fevers that haunt a filthy one, they grope their way toward the idea that disease is carried by things too small to see, and they begin, crudely at first, to fight it. Lives that in our world were spent by the million are saved, cities swell, and to feed a civilization hungry for the written word, the copyists of Alexandria turn at last from the pen to the press, carving, inking, and stamping their texts by the thousand. Knowledge, already safe, now becomes cheap. A farmer's son in a Nile village can hold Euclid in his hands, nor does the New World stay penned within the Mediterranean, holding Eratosthenes' true measure of the globe. Alexandrian navigators know how large their planet is and can reason about what lies across its unmapped seas. Fleets driven by sail and engine push down the coast of Africa and past the edges of the old charts, and the peoples on the far shores of the world meet the heirs of Alexandria, centuries before any European sail appears on their horizon. The map of the world is filled in while Rome's roads are still new. The ripples spread until they remake the very shape of history. The long, quiet centuries that our world remembers as the fall of Rome and the darkness after it never descend in the same way, because the lamp of Alexandria is never extinguished and relit. The Mediterranean moves, century by century, down a road our own world would not begin to travel until the Renaissance, and it sets out with a 1,000-year head start. Follow that road to its end, and the vision is staggering. By the time our history was crowning Charlemagne, this parallel world lights its streets and drives its mills with engines of steam. By the time our ancestors were founding their first universities, theirs are grinding glass into telescopes and lifting them toward a sky they already know is full of other worlds. And somewhere in the centuries that for us were the Middle Ages, in a world that never lost 1,000 years, the heirs of Alexandria look up at the moon, no longer as a god or an omen, but as a shore. And they begin to plan the voyage. 1,000 years early, humanity reaches for the stars. All because, on one windy afternoon on an ancient waterfront, a fire was held back from a house full of scrolls. And yet, this brighter world carries its own long shadow. Knowledge has never been only a gift. It is also a weapon and a leash. A civilization that learns to build engines 1,000 years early also learns 1,000 years early to forge the engines of war and to bind whole peoples to the wheel of an empire that never falls. The unbroken library is also an unbroken power, and not every soul who lives beneath it is free. Perhaps that is the deepest lesson of this parallel, that the question was never simply whether we might have known more sooner. It is what we would have chosen to do with the knowing. We cannot go back and hold the flame for them. In our world, the library died its long, quiet death, and we are still, in a sense, recovering what its shelves once held. But every time we copy a book, rather than trust a single one, every time we share a discovery, instead of burying it, we are choosing the other branch, the one where the fire is held back. The Library of Alexandria taught humanity its most expensive lesson twice over, that knowledge gathered across centuries can vanish in an afternoon, and that the only thing harder than learning something is making certain it is never forgotten. This has been Historically Parallel.